That's a very good question. Nobody ever asked me that question before. I don't think it is so ambitious because I started it in 1989. Because after I started it in 1989, I only wrote a little, 20 pages, and then I put it away. And then over the course of the years in between, I would add notes to a little envelope that I was keeping. But then when I decided I would take it out of the envelope and look at it again, then I started to see what was going to be required of me to make what I had begun into a large book, a novel, a narrative. And it was at that point that I realized that it was going to be quite ambitious, because there's a line in the book in which the narrator quotes John Ruskin, and he says, "Composition is the arrangement of unequal things." I had a lot of unequal things compiled. So in order to compose a book, I had to put together many, many, many unequal things. The most unequal thing I had to put together was what my model for the book was, which is to have part one and part two be fairly separate, and yet, even though separate, make a whole. And so that was for me the most ambitious part, because I remember when I was writing the book, I was very happily writing along in part one, and I got to the end of part one, and I thought to myself, well, maybe I can just publish this by itself. And I showed it to my editor, and he thought, well, he said, what else are you going to write? And I said, well, my ambition for the book is to have a departure, and then the book go in another direction, which will be rather audace, and it will maybe test the credibility of readers. But it was always my ambition to have this book go like this and go like that. So that was my sense of the book's ambition. Also, I wanted to have, in narrative terms, a speaker of the book be both a child and an adult at the same time. That's something I had never fully done before. So those were my two principal audacities with the book. The false part was fortuitous. It came along after the fact of the book's beginning. The two, one falls and the other falls. Great Falls, the city in Montana, has always been interesting to me because of its geography, because it has mountains, and it has the prairies, and it has this marvelous river. It is also literally a place where I can make anything plausible that I want to have happen there. For me, it is what the poet Richard Hugo calls a triggering town. It triggers something in me. And because it has an Air Force base, and it's got a railroad, and it's got this river, and it's got all of this farming and farm evidence all around, and it's got the West and all of the traditions of the West, guns and desperados. And so for me, it allows me to do everything I want to do there. I've just been happy to go back and set things there. As you say, I sort of like the name. The name in English, Rock Springs, rather not Rock Springs, Great Falls, sort of implies this sort of great dramatic event. And as you can see, when I misspoke myself and said Rock Springs, where the names of places are very important to me. Because turn out to be words that the reader sees on the page over and over and over again. And you can't underestimate the fact that reading and writing books is about words you see on the page. And if you're constantly seeing words on the page that are ugly, or that are undramatic, or that are, for some reason or another, off-putting, it will drive you away from the book. It becomes that way. You have to get lucky when you're writing books. And you have to make choices ignorantly, blindly, for non-allegorical reasons, just because you instinctually like something. But that those choices then become emblematic when you invest them with all of the attention and all of the intelligence and imagination that a novel requires. So you start off thinking, well, this is a nice word. And then later on, what you realize is, if you're lucky, ooh, I've made this be actually something larger than it started out to be. You couldn't teach anybody that because it's almost accidental. And it comes from the attention and the intensity and the sort of heat that's involved in writing a novel. My definition of talent is that talent is a kind of a version of intensity. Yeah. It's a species of vigor. And if you're vigorous, and I have always been vigorous, then talent will come along. Interested in the consequence of things, in the what comes after the big events. I mean, for me, that's where morality becomes highly visible, when we see what are the aftermaths of our behavior, the aftermaths of our actions, of our loves, our deaths, our betrayals, our insincerities, our passions. A religion of faith, like Christianity, would say, and does say, that we don't have to know the consequences of these things. We instill in our behavior a recognition of their good or bad consequences, and so we don't perform these things. I've never been able to do that. I've never been able to understand what the consequences of things were until I either imagined their event or until I performed them myself. I'm without that kind of religious faith. Not important for me at all. I put it in the book like a little piece of background. I'm not Jewish, and I went to a Jewish friend of mine, and I said to her, I have a woman in my book who is Jewish, but she's secular Jewish. She's not observant. Would there be anything that a Jewish woman might retain from her childhood or from her life, even though she was not believing, which would sort of emblemize her Jewishness? And my friend said, oh yes, indeed, you should have that. I got that. So I just stuck it in the drawer.
Oh, okay.
I know, it's very disappointing. For me, again, very craven, I made her Jewish because I wanted to make her visible. I didn't want to, and maybe by making her visible in an otherwise non-Jewish setting, maybe I did put her across a border in a way that the reader would recognize. I've never thought about that before. I just wanted to make her distinctive, and once I made her distinctive, then again I got lucky, because that allowed me to speculate about a marriage between two people, which was an ill-gotten marriage, a marriage that should never have happened. I mean, Dell says that his father was the son of Alabama timber estimators and was from the backwoods of the South, and here was this educated, somewhat displaced Jewish woman from the American Pacific Northwest, and Dell speculates that they're so far apart from each other, and then, you know, and this was a border, okay. I never thought of that before till just now, but they tried to make a union that never worked. No.
No?
Completely fortuitous. No, it wasn't. I mean, no, that was never anything that I thought about. I mean, the only thing that I did realize, and this is after the fact of writing the book, was that Dell's parents, Bev and Neva, are a little bit parallel to Rimlinger and Florence in the second half of the book. There is a kind of repetition of a kind of familial situation in part 2 and in part 1. I was very surprised at how many formulations in part 2 were reflections of formulations in part 1. I didn't really completely plan that. I always thought that part 2 and part 1 were inextricably united through the course of Dell's life. But I didn't really completely plan that there would be these shadows from part 1 falling into part 2. Absolutely, that was absolutely for me what I was interested in. I was also more, I suppose, Dell was for me a much more convenient, I won't say attractive because Berner is a very attractive character to me, but Dell was a much more convenient character to carry through the book. And also the book's economies and the concentration required for a book to be relatively intense and economical. The economies of the book required that I not carry both characters into part 2 because it would have completely blurred and diffused my purposes. And that's a way of understanding this after the fact, because I never really, for more than 5 minutes, considered taking Berner into part 2 of the book. It just never was part of my plan because I could only really carry him. I mean, memory is the actual instrument by which, when we narrate our lives, we begin to accept our lives. And there, as you say, are memories that we do not have clearly, and there are memories that we have clearly. But we have to be willing to dispense with the things that we don't understand and accept our own part in the events that we do understand. So and memory is our instrument. I mean, for me, it's very important as I get toward the end of my own life to be able to say, I take responsibility for my life. There's nothing that I've done in my life that I just have to, avert my head from. And it's also important for me to think that whoever that boy was when I was 15 years old is recognizable to me in the man I am now, almost 70. So those are, for reasons that seem to me to be both understandable and highly personal, those are important issues for me. And so this book, and this is one of the reasons that I think that this book is ambitious for me, this book tries to dramatize that. Well, for me, and that's a very good question, for me, beyond the facts, on the other side of the facts, are all kinds of things which, in my mother in memory, I say, are things you cannot recover. It requires the imagination, then, to recover those things. And if the imagination cannot specifically recover them, or cannot specifically compensate for them, the imagination allows you to forgive yourself, allows you to accept yourself, reconcile yourself to things that you're simply beyond what you can know. There's a line of Ralph Waldo Emerson's in which he says, "An infinite solitude underlies us all." And it's not loneliness. It isn't lonely, it's solitude. Loneliness is solitude that you suffer from. Solitude is just the human condition. And because we are rather solitary, we are encased in our own skin and our minds are invisible to others, the imagination is very, very, very essential as an instrument of sympathy. But the fact of the matter is that you're another person, I'm another person. There will always be things about each other we can't know. There is a kind of restraint in the book. For me, that restraint, and it's very evident when the children go to the jail and the parents are behind bars in jail cells. And the children don't say very much, and the parents don't say very much. And that was just me writing it and trying to get as close as I could write to saying something that wasn't stupid. So that the restraint, in a way, comes more from my caution and not wanting to have somebody say something cliched or say something ridiculous or say something wrong that the reader would dismiss, than it was my trying to actually construct a restrained situation. So many qualities that books have are simply reflections of the writer trying to do the right thing for himself in that situation, trying not to make a mistake, trying not to say something crazy, trying not to say something wrong, trying not to say something stupid. So when I can remember very vividly writing that scene, and it was a scene when I wrote it that I was really looking forward to because I thought it was going to be terrifically dramatic. Mm. 2 children come into a jail to see their parents who the day before they were living a perfectly normal life with, they thought. And I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be wonderful. I can't wait to write it. And so I have them walk through the door into the jail cell. And I think to myself, oh my God, what can I possibly have anybody say? It was as if the situation itself was so dramatic. And so what I elected to do was to have people say less in order that the things that they said only punctuate the situation, not try to in any way compete with the situation. So in a way, if it's a successful scene, and this is something all the way through, if it's a successful scene, it's largely because I didn't make a mistake more than that I might have been brilliant.
I'm not sure.
Well, but that's the truth. I'm telling you the truth of my experience, and you won't get many writers who will ever do that.
Oh, yeah,
tell you the truth of their experience.
I'm not sure because when
I
someone
wouldn't lie about this. Because I don't want that. The only thing that I will say, if you want to say it's an aesthetic, I will say it's an aesthetic de moindre. But I would like to have une esthétique de superfluité. I would like to have an aesthetic that was just, but I don't have it. I don't like less. I think less is less.
No, I'm not
I think
sure.
more is more. But there are always these differences. But as a writer, I'm on the one hand very ambitious. On the other hand, I'm very realpolitik, and you might even say humble, because writing novels makes you humble. If you're not humble after you've written novels, you probably haven't done it well enough. And so when I tell you about how something comes into existence, it may seem that I am being unduly humble, or that I am saying less about myself than I should. I'm just telling you what the experience was. I went away from that scene thinking to myself, it disappoints me that I wasn't able to say something else. And I would constantly, through the course of writing that book, go back to that scene, and I would look at it and I would say, can't I get somebody else to say something? And I just wrote the screenplay for this book, and I got to completely reimagine the whole scene in the screenplay. And still, I didn't have very much to say. Because I had a brilliant translator. It's true. Madame Camus, to get the humor of a book like this into the French version, because there is, as you say, in English, there is some, is an act of genius. A clownish father, even though he causes great disasters, he's still a rather sweet and sort of bumbling and ineffectual. Yes, but it also more, I don't trust sociology, okay? Sociology is seeing things from a balloon way up in the sky. I think that novelists are Aristotelians. They deal in details and particulars. And what I am interested in a teleological way is to see where things actually start, to see what things that you might generalize about actually begin in experience. And sometimes there's enough of a difference between those two things that one will make the other a lie. So you think to yourself, well, these two people are just, counterculture people. They're just people starting out in the 60s and they become hippies and In fact, no, they're not. They're just a mother and a father who run out of money, and that's all they are. And they get terrified, and they make a terrible mistake, and they abandon their children, and they go off to prison, and they commit suicide. It's got nothing to do with hippies in the 60s and the third world, so I want to be sure that you don't understand them to be anything but the way I want you to understand them. It's a reference for me because that is the formula for art. And it's particularly the formula for narrative art as I practice it. But it is also the formula for a successful life. That your success as a person living on the earth is relatable to how well you can compose into a cogent, plausible life all of the myriad ill-fitting things that are constantly happening to you. So yes, it's a crucial formula in the book. To compose is to marry otherwise non-fitting events. No, it's not. But once again, that's one of those lucky things.
Yeah.
But if you ever read Independence Day.
Yeah.
At the end of Independence Day, Frank says something about the last piece in the puzzle. Huh. I was a little boy who grew up with jigsaw puzzles. And it was one of those kind of almost completely mechanical thing that you did, you know. I mean, that requires no imagination. You just put that here, and you put that there, and you put that there, and you put that there, and eventually you get this picture of a flower. And that was just one of those very formative experiences for me. Every Christmas, my family would get a new jigsaw puzzle, and they would put out on a table like this all of the pieces. And over the 2 weeks of Christmas holiday, people would pass through the room, or I would sit down like this, and for 5 minutes or an hour or 30 minutes, I would just sit there and look at things, you know, and start putting that together. It's just one of those experiences that I found to be so hugely satisfying that I just naturally put it into books. But it has a place in books. But that's just good luck. I'll tell you how I felt when I wrote it, okay?
Okay.
You have to reconcile what you think with what I did. That has to happen. So I've got this guy sitting at a table talking to his son, who's gone to the bathroom or gone to get water or whatever he does, passing by, and he's almost got the whole thing together. One piece left. So I'm thinking to myself, what can I have him do with this piece? I can't have him put it in because it just seemed all wrong to put it in the middle, and there it's fixed, perfect, you know. So I have him holding this piece in his hand. Well, what can I have him do? I have him throw it across the room. I can have him tear it up. I just had him eat it. I didn't know what else to do. I just thought it was the best choice, you know. Have him eat it, and then once he eats it, and then I have to say, well, after he eats it, what can he say? Because you're always just sort of putting yourself into a cul-de-sac, and then you have to find an exit from the cul-de-sac. And so that's what was my exit from the cul-de-sac. Now, I think it works out pretty well, but it was just very practical. Masterpieces then have just gone down in my estimation. Absolutely. I mean, you know, I'm just a writer who continues to go back to the things that are, and I don't like to use the word obsessed by, because I'm not obsessed by them. Obsess means pathology. Oh, it's not a pathology. It's just something that interests me and that continues to recur in my mind. And so I'm always trying to find a way to say something a little bit better, a little bit more about something that I have thought about all my life and that I feel like is of lingering interest to the reader. Relationships between fathers and sons. The way in which memory serves us and disserves us. The way in which the landscape that we live on becomes both our ally and our opponent. Our sense of being disenfranchised from the place where we began, being an opportunity rather than a disability. All of those things are just, you know, okay, those are the things that my life has been about. My life has been about. But it's not about my life, but it's about the degree to which my life is inadequate to completely satisfy all of my interests. I live in just one little particle of that life, but there, for me, lots more to say about these things than just my own life's experiences. But there are profound answers in this book to questions, which is, one of which is, the question is, how do I live? And the answer is this way. Yeah, that's probably right. That's probably right. Yeah. I mean, as I think you are implying, in that way, it's pretty ordinary.
Mm.
I think it's a pretty ordinary book in terms of its the way in which you would teach it.
Mm.
It's not a very ordinary book in the way in which you would read it. I'm a sort of a modest writer who aspires to something that's not modest. And so I love literature, and I've loved the literature that I've read, and but I want to write books that are understandable, that are accessible, that will find a wide readership. And so the structures that I have inherited, I mean, I really don't think about coming-of-age novels. I really don't think about Bildungsroman. Those words never enter my mind while I'm just thinking about these details and how I can put them together and form a composition. But I'm aware that when I was young, I read such books. I read Goethe. I read The Magic Mountain. I read these books, and I'm sure that I learned and inherited something from them. But I don't think I'm just. I'm using my experience, my imaginative experience, and using these structures to try to find a cohesive form for them. So, for me, that's a modest undertaking. But with that details, I try to do something that will be renewed and useful to a reader. My notion is that comes from F.R. Leavis, the British critic. He said that literature is the supreme means by which we renew our sensuous and emotional life and learn a new awareness. And so the idea of renew means to make new again. It tells you. I try to always tell you what I want you to know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to hide anything except the unimportant things. The only thing that I care about is that the book not somehow get violated in the way that you describe it, so that it becomes less complicated than it is, so that it becomes just another example of a form being replicated. Because that isn't consistent with my experience of it.
Mm.
Consistent with my experience is this kind of, like I told you about the scene in the jail, it's just this intense struggle to make sense of things that don't fit together. But I do it for classical reasons. I do it because I want to. I think that if I intensely struggle to make sense of material that is otherwise nonsensical, that it will be useful then for the reader. I wouldn't say that fiction gives you a superior truth. It gives you an alternate truth, but not a superior truth. I mean, the thing that fiction does, morally, is that it champions life. By making life its subject, it asks the reader to value life more. It asks the reader to take life more seriously. But fiction always, as its ultimate goal, returns you to life and to whatever its particulars are. It never sets itself up, at least in my practice, it never sets itself up as being in any way but subordinate. Completely. I mean, I like essays, and I've written all of them. And the idea of what an essay is, which is to try to do something, the words are different, but they are the same word, is for me what a piece of writing is. A piece of writing is an attempt. A piece of writing is a good attempt to make something whole and make something clearer than it was in life. Yes, but it's entirely intuitive. I see some things that I do after I do them, and I think to myself, isn't that surprising? Here is this, and there was that. Now, I know that when I say I'm 3/4 of the way through a book, and I am puzzling over something to say, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to have a character say. I don't know what to have anybody think. I don't know what to have happen. My nature is to go back and see if there was something that I did before that could bear a little bit more, as you say, iteration, reiteration. So it is my nature, is instinctually my nature to say, maybe there's something that I've already touched on that could actually be made to appear here, and say then more about it because of the experience that has passed since the first time I mentioned it. And I do know that when you do that, it makes the book seem, if I don't think it makes it be, but it makes it seem more intellectually cohesive. But it's artifice. It's completely artifice. Well, I don't like that. It might be true. I don't like it. Because even though it might not seem this to meet me, I'm a person who thinks about, we say in America, the glass being half full and not the glass being half empty. I once wrote in a book years ago, I had someone say, love is a loss. And my wife said to me, she said, why did you say that? Why did you say that? And so I thought to myself, well, why did I say that? And I thought, that's too easy. That's just too easy. That isn't smart enough. It's not to say that love doesn't contain losses. In love, you lose other alternatives. In love, you lose sometimes your sense of yourself. But you gain so much. So I think that even though characters are continually dealing with losses, which is what we all do every day, I feel like the book itself is what you gain. That if you can make loss a kind of subordinate subject, that the fact that I can make this book out of this is a plus.